Welcome to Founding Chronicles, where we uncover the hidden stories of America's past. Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale from history. Let's journey into the heart of the Appalachian Hills and uncover the untold story that will leave you speechless. It was the summer of 1927 in the Appalachian Hills of eastern Kentucky, a place where the mountains seemed to rise endlessly, hiding secrets in their dense forests and narrow valleys. The communities there were tight-knit, families often stretching back generations, living off the land and bound by traditions older than any record in the county courthouse. Among these families was the Lee household, small, modest, and known quietly among neighbors as a family of quiet strength and pride. Mary Lee, a girl of 17 with chestnut hair that caught the sunlight and eyes the color of river stones, had grown up here, running barefoot along the dusty trails, learning the songs of the mountains, and helping her mother with chores from the earliest dawn to dusk. Everyone in the valley knew her. She was the kind of girl whose laughter could fill a room and whose kindness left people talking long after she had gone. Mary's family lived in a weathered cabin perched on the side of a narrow ridge. Her father, a miner who had spent decades underground, came home each evening with hands scarred by coal and a heart heavy with worry for the family he barely understood how to protect. Her mother, worn from years of tending gardens and sewing clothes, doted on Mary in ways that only mothers of Appalachian Hills knew: quiet, careful, small gestures, like saving a few pennies to buy a ribbon for her hair, or mending the sleeves of her worn dresses so she could look neat at Sunday church. The Lee family had survived the hard times that followed the First World War and the influenza epidemic, and now, in the late 1920s, they were clinging to the fragile stability that the mountains offered. Mary herself was restless. Though she loved her home, the mountains seemed to whisper to her, hinting at something beyond the ridges, something she could not name. She would wander for hours, following the trails her ancestors had walked for decades, sometimes stopping by the creek to watch the sunlight dance on the water, sometimes climbing higher than anyone thought safe, feeling the wind tug at her skirts, and dreaming of a life beyond the coal dust in the small, familiar hollows. Neighbors often warned her to be careful, reminding her that the mountains could be beautiful but cruel, full of sudden drops, hidden sinkholes, and forests that seemed to swallow people whole. But Mary Lee had the boldness of youth, and she believed she could navigate it, could tame the wildness of the hills with nothing but her own steps and intuition. On the morning of July 14th, Mary kissed her mother goodbye, promising to return by sundown. She was heading into the forest to pick wildflowers and berries, a simple task that had become a ritual during the warm months. The air was thick with the scent of pine and honeysuckle, and the sunlight painted the paths in golden stripes through the canopy. She hummed a tune she had learned from her grandmother, a melody that spoke of longing and homecoming. Mary walked with the confidence of a girl who knew every turn, every ridge, and every creek bed, yet there was an unusual tension in the air that day, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Hours passed, and when evening came, Mary Lee had not returned. Her mother called for her, her voice trembling as the shadows lengthened across the valley. The neighbors joined the search, men with lanterns and women with baskets, combing the familiar trails, calling her name, hearts tightening with each unanswered shout. The sun dipped behind the ridges, and still there was no Mary. By midnight, the whole community had gathered near the Lee cabin, a cold fear settling over them like the mist that often crept down from the mountains in the night. The sheriff was summoned, and horses were saddled to search the larger stretches of forest and ridgeline. Every hour that passed felt heavier than the last, each creaking tree branch and rustling leaf carrying the dread that Mary might never be found. The days that followed were filled with whispers and unease. Families who had lived in these hills for generations began speaking of old legends, of spirits that claimed the unwary, of shadows in the forest that had eyes. Some claimed to have seen a figure in the woods, slender and moving with impossible speed, glimpsed from a distance and vanished before anyone could approach. Search parties combed the mountains for miles, finding nothing but the usual remnants of wildlife, a bird's feather, the broken limb of an old tree, the faint traces of deer tracks. Mary Lee was gone, as if the earth had swallowed her whole, leaving only a hollow echo of her laughter in the wind knot by the third week. Despair had begun to take root in the valley. The Lee family endured sleepless nights, haunted by visions of their daughter, wandering lost in the forest, calling for them with a voice they might never hear again. The local papers picked up the story, printing grainy black and white photographs of Mary, smiling in a sunlit clearing, with a caption that read simply, "Where is Mary Lee?" Strangers wrote letters offering prayers and speculations, and some even came to the cabin, hoping to help in the search. Yet no new clues emerged, no footprints beyond the known paths, no whispered hints in the hollows. It was as if the mountains had conspired to erase her from existence. But this was only the beginning of a mystery. Mary's disappearance did not fit the usual patterns. There were no signs of struggle in the cabin or along the paths she would have taken. Her basket of flowers and berries was found leaning against the cabin wall, untouched, as though she had simply stepped away and vanished. And then came the strange occurrences lights in the forest at night. Glimpses of a girl in a white dress, appearing along the ridges and vanishing when approached. Soft humming carried by the wind, a tune only her family recognized. People began to whisper of curses, of old grudges buried in the mountains, and of the power of the land to take and keep. Even decades later, those who lived through that summer remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the longing. Mary Lee became a ghost in the memory of the community, a symbol of all the mysteries the Appalachian hills held, a reminder that some stories of America were not written in ink but in silence, shadows, and the wind through the pines. Families passed down the tale, warning children to respect the forest and honor the past, never fully explaining what had happened, and never forgetting the girl whose laughter once lit the ridges. The search for Mary Lee stretched into weeks, and by then, the summer sun had begun to mellow into a softer glow, casting long shadows over the Appalachian ridges and filling the valleys with a golden haze. Every path, every hollow, every creek was scoured repeatedly, but the forest seemed to guard its secret with a stubborn, almost sentient determination. Men who had grown up in these hills, who knew the forests as well as their own hands, returned each evening with sunburned faces and empty hands, voices hoarse from calling her name. The mountains, which had once been a place of comfort and routine, now felt like an ever-present labyrinth, hiding whispers and movement just beyond the eye. Neighbors and friends came from nearby hollows to aid in the search. Families lit lanterns and torches, forming lines that wound through the forests, over ridges, and into valleys. They called out her name until the sound of their own voices began to echo unnaturally, bouncing off cliffs and ridgelines. Some swore they heard a reply, a soft, distant, almost musical voice, but every time they ran toward it, the sound vanished. The phenomenon unsettled even the most skeptical, experienced woodsmen. They whispered about the old legends, stories their grandparents had passed down, the lost ones who wandered the hills, spirits or humans, caught between worlds, and the mountains that sometimes refused to let them go. At the Lee cabin, nights were the hardest. Mary's mother would sit by the window, clutching the faded shawl she had made for her daughter, eyes straining against the darkness, imagining she could see Mary's silhouette in the trees. Her father, who had once been a strong, unshakable man, spent hours pacing the floor, muttering under his breath about mistakes he may have made, about whether he had failed her in some way. The neighbors left offerings of food and prayers, but the Lee family's grief was private, raw, and unbearable. It seeped into every corner of the cabin, into the creaking floorboards, and into the air itself. Soon, stories began to emerge, strange, unsettling accounts from other families in the hills. A farmer claimed he saw a girl matching Mary's description near an abandoned cabin 2 ridges away, standing silently as though waiting for someone. When he approached, she had vanished. Another witness, a hunter familiar with every animal, track in the region, swore he found fresh footprints, delicate, human, but they led off a cliff and disappeared, as though she had walked into the air itself. The mountains were beginning to feel less like a home and more like a puzzle, a riddle that mocked the searchers' efforts. The local authorities, initially sympathetic, began to grow impatient. Deputies combed the forests with systematic searches, mapping out routes, setting traps, and questioning families who lived in remote hollows. Yet every lead led to nothing. Every track ended abruptly, and every story seemed just out of reach. Mary Lee's disappearance became a phenomenon beyond a single family's grief. People from surrounding counties started to talk, spreading the mystery across the state. Newspapers carried the story, printed her photograph, and asked their readers, "Where is Mary Lee?" But even as the tale grew, no answers came. Amid this confusion, a sense of fear began to take hold. The forest itself seemed to shift and change, a living entity that hid secrets and watched the intruders who sought them. Those who spent nights searching reported hearing soft footsteps behind them, only to turn and find no one. Others swore they heard Mary's voice whispering their names, calling them toward places no one should enter. The older generation, steeped in the folklore of the mountains, whispered that the hills were claiming her, that she had been chosen or taken by something older and stranger than the living. Children were warned to stay close to home. Women prayed fervently, and men carried crosses and charms into the forest, hoping to protect themselves from whatever had touched Mary Lee. And then, a few weeks into the search, an even stranger development arose. A series of small folded notes began appearing along the trails near the Lee cabin. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, and painfully familiar. The notes read simple phrases: "Don't be afraid, I am okay, and the hills speak to me." No one saw who left them, and the handwriting could not be matched to anyone in the valley. Some believed Mary herself had left them, a sign that she was alive and somehow communicating from the woods. Others feared it was a cruel trick, that some unseen force or person was playing with the community's desperation. The tension in the valley thickened. Each new note stirred hope and terror, in equal measure as summer stretched into late August. Exhaustion began to wear down even the most steadfast searchers. Families slept in shifts, prepared meals outdoors, and spent hours combing dense undergrowth, overgrown trails, and hidden hollows. Every discovery, a piece of clothing, a broken branch, a misplaced shoe, was met with both relief and horror, a sign of life and a reminder of absence. The mountains, once familiar and safe, had transformed into a domain of fear, mystery, and grief. And yet, Mary Lee remained elusive, a ghostly figure whose presence was felt everywhere but seen nowhere. By autumn, the story had reached a national audience. Journalists came from far-off cities, carrying cameras and notebooks, eager to capture the eerie tale of a young girl swallowed by the Appalachian wilds. Photographs of the mountains accompanied articles describing the haunting beauty of the hills, the unfathomable searches, and the strange phenomena reported by locals. Mary Lee's face appeared in newspapers alongside the headlines: "The girl who walked into the mountains and never returned. Appalachia's mysterious disappearance. Have you seen Mary Lee?" These articles spread across the country, drawing attention to a place many Americans had never seen, but now could not stop imagining. Amid the media attention, the Lee family grew more isolated. Some villagers, wary of strangers, began avoiding them. Others sought to capitalize on the mystery, selling trinkets or offering guided searches. The family's grief, already a private and searing fire, became public spectacle. Yet, despite the intrusion, the community clung together in small, protective ways. They remembered Mary as she had been bright, kind, and unafraid. They lit candles in the churches, left flowers along trails, and held vigils each Sunday, hoping that somehow their prayers would reach the girl in the hills. Even as winter approached, with the first frosts frosting the ridges and the cold winds beginning to howl through the hollows, no trace of Mary Lee was found. And though the physical searches slowed, the sense of unease never lifted. The hills seemed different, somehow watching, patient, and impenetrable. People spoke less of the girl's disappearance and more of the hills themselves, of the strange power that seemed to cling to the forests, the ridges, and the valleys. Mary Lee was gone, but her story had changed the mountains, and those who lived there felt the presence of something that could not be named, but was undeniably real. As winter crept into the Appalachian hills, a quiet, haunting stillness settled over the valley. Snow dusted the ridges and hollow floors, and the cold wind carried a mournful moan through the pines. The search for Mary Lee had slowed, but the sense of loss only deepened, becoming a shadow that stretched across every home, every family, every trail. The forest, once a place of routine labor and play, now felt like a living monument to absence. The villagers whispered that the mountains themselves had claimed her, that the girl who had laughed along the creeks now moved invisibly among the trees, unseen but ever present. Despite the cold, Mary's parents never stopped searching in their own ways. Her mother would rise before dawn, wrapping herself in layers, carrying a lantern into the snow-laden woods, calling Mary's name in a voice that trembled but refused to falter. She left small offerings along the trail's flowers preserved in water, scraps of bread, or little trinkets Mary had loved. Her father took to wandering the ridges, examining footprints, listening for the smallest rustle, following whispers that seemed to drift on the icy wind. Friends and neighbors often joined, but the most they could do was search silently, their eyes scanning the white-blanketed forest floor. Hearts heavy with fear and hope intertwined. As the winter wore on, strange occurrences increased. Villagers reported seeing a figure, pale and slender, moving among the trees at dawn. It would appear for only a moment, framed by mist or sunlight reflecting off frost, before vanishing entirely. Those who approached swore it was Mary Lee, her dress caught in the wind like a ghostly ripple, her hair shimmering in a way no one could explain. But when they drew near, she was gone, leaving only disturbed snow or footprints that melted almost as soon as they were made. The local children whispered about the snow girl, the girl who walked the mountains, appearing and disappearing, sometimes leaving gifts of berries or pine cones at the edges of town. Rumors and legends began to intertwine with the reality of Mary's disappearance. Elderly residents told stories of other children who had vanished into these hills decades before, always returning in strange ways or never at all. There were tales of the Watchers, invisible presences in the forest who guided or trapped souls, and of hidden hollows where time moved differently, where people could be lost for days and emerge decades older or younger. The line between history and myth blurred, and the villagers began to see Mary Lee not just as a missing girl, but as a part of something older, a thread in the mountain's secret tapestry. In the Lee cabin, the absence of Mary became a tangible thing. Her mother kept her room exactly as it had been, folding her clothes neatly, placing her shoes by the bed, leaving her chair at the table. Every corner of the cabin echoed with memory, the sound of her laughter, the way she had traced letters on frosted windows, the hum of her songs drifting through the rooms. Her father, meanwhile, became more withdrawn, his eyes distant, as though he had begun to wander the forests in some invisible way alongside his daughter. Visitors described the house as quiet, sorrowful, almost holy in its grief, a place where time had slowed, waiting for Mary to return. One particularly bitter evening, a group of villagers reported a gathering of lights deep in the forest along an old trail that had long been abandoned. At first, they thought it was the lanterns of hunters or loggers, but the pattern was different, moving too gracefully, too deliberately to be human. They crept closer, and what they saw has been recounted for decades with awe and fear. Figures, small and flickering like flames, danced among the snow-laden trees, forming a shape that resembled a girl walking gracefully, holding her arms out as though embracing the wind itself. The witnesses fled in terror, returning to the village to speak in hushed, reverent tones. Was it Mary Lee? Or was it something older, something the mountains had conjured? The media attention that had once been intense began to die down, leaving the valley to its own stories. Yet every winter, when the wind cut through the hollows and the snow lay thick across the ridges, people said they could hear her humming faintly, a tune that matched the one she had learned from her grandmother. Families passed down the story to their children, warning them to respect the forests, to walk carefully, and to listen, because the mountains remembered those who wandered too far. Mary Lee had become both memory and legend, her disappearance an event that shaped not just one family, but the entire community. Even as decades passed, some insisted on searching. Amateur explorers, drawn by newspaper clippings, old letters, and photographs, retraced her steps, following the same ridges and creeks she had once known. Some claimed to feel her presence, to see glimpses of a girl among the trees, or to find small, inexplicable objects, flowers, carved sticks, a ribbon left along their paths. The mountains had become a mirror of history itself, reflecting both the tangible and the impossible, and Mary Lee's name was whispered as if she had never left at all. Yet, through all of it, the emotional heart of the story remained with the Lee family and the villagers who had loved her. Her mother grew older, carrying a grief that never softened, her father's strength quietly crumbling into quiet desperation. They never gave up hope entirely, even when the world seemed to have moved on, because some part of the heart knows that absence does not erase love, and that memories, like footprints in snow or whispers on the wind, can linger forever. The valley itself seemed to hold her memory. The streams, the ridges, and the hollows all carried traces of her presence, subtle signs that life and legend could intertwine in the misty Appalachian hills. And then came the most unsettling reports. Travelers passing through the mountains would occasionally claim that they had seen Mary Lee or someone like her walking along the roads late at night, pale against the moonlight, silent and watching, vanishing before they could reach her. Some of these encounters were brief, some terrifying, but each added a layer of mystery that refused to fade with time. People wondered whether she had become something in between, part of the living world and part of the hills themselves, an eternal echo of youth, curiosity, and the strange pull of the forest. Mary Lee's disappearance had begun as a tragedy, a missing girl feared lost to the mountains. But over the years, it had become a story of wonder and dread intertwined. She was remembered not only for who she had been, a bright, kind, adventurous girl, but also for what she represented, the enduring power of memory, the unexplainable mysteries of nature, and the way a small, quiet community could be transformed by a single unfathomable event. Families told the story around fires, shared it in hushed tones at church, and recounted it for visitors who would later return to distant cities to tell the tale. And the mountains, ever silent, continued to watch, patient and unmoving, holding the secret of Mary Lee in the folds of their hills and the depths of their hollows. As the years turned into decades, the story of Mary Lee settled into the collective memory of the Appalachian hills, but it never faded. The mountains that had once seemed ordinary now carried an air of the uncanny. Their ridges and hollows whispered about in reverent tones. Families who had lived alongside the Lee household for generations carried the story in their hearts, teaching it to their children as both cautionary tale and cherished history. Mary Lee became a symbol of the mysterious, untamed power of the mountains, and of the fragile line between life and legend, between reality and the unknown. The Lee family, though time had softened some of their grief, never fully recovered. Mary's mother, now stooped with age, would often sit on the porch of her weathered cabin, her hands folded in her lap, eyes scanning the ridges where the sunlight cut golden lines through the trees. She would hum the tune Mary had learned from her grandmother, her voice trembling with memory, a way to keep the presence of her daughter alive. Her father, who had long since passed, left behind the faint traces of hope and sorrow etched into the walls of their home. A family that had endured hardship and loss, yet refused to forget. Over the decades, occasional reports of Mary Lee or something like her continued to appear. Travelers, hikers, and hunters claimed to see a pale figure in the distance, moving silently through the forest, always just beyond reach. Some spoke of finding delicate ribbons tied to tree branches, fresh wildflowers placed at the edges of forgotten paths, and faint footprints that melted into mud or snow. The locals, familiar with the story, rarely questioned these encounters. They had come to accept that Mary Lee's disappearance was more than a tragedy. It was a part of the mountains' enduring mystery, a story that belonged not just to her family, but to the land itself. The legend grew as generations passed. Children in the valley learned to respect the forest, to tread carefully on its trails, and to listen closely to the wind, because the mountains might carry the voice of Mary Lee or the echo of someone long gone. Visitors from distant towns would hear the story from locals, who spoke with a mix of reverence and awe, feeling the weight of history and mystery in every word. Mary Lee had become an icon of Appalachia, not for fame or fortune, but as a living testament to the strange, unexplainable power of memory, nature, and human imagination. Even historians and folklorists took notice. Scholars visiting the region recorded oral histories, examined letters and notes left behind, and documented the patterns of sightings. They wrote papers and gave lectures, trying to piece together what had happened, but the truth remained elusive. No theory, accidental wandering, abduction, the pull of a secret hollow could explain everything. Each possibility carried its own weight of horror and wonder, leaving audiences both disturbed and fascinated. Mary Lee had become a figure that transcended time, a living enigma caught between the real and the imagined, a symbol of a past that refused to release its hold on the present. Yet the most powerful aspect of her story remained, the human one, the pain, love, and resilience of those who had waited, searched, and remembered. The Lee family's devotion, mirrored by the neighbors' tireless concern, embodied the essence of Appalachian life community, bound by hardship, loyalty, and shared experience. Their grief, carried quietly across decades, reminded everyone who heard the story that some losses are permanent, some mysteries never solved, and yet the act of remembering can itself be an enduring form of love. Visitors to the area often feel the weight of her story. They hike the trails she once walked, visit the ridges where she was last seen, and feel the strange sensation of being watched, not by wild animals, but by the memory of someone long gone. The cabins, the creeks, the hollowed paths, all seem to pulse with the presence of Mary Lee, a ghostly figure who refuses to be forgotten. The valley has changed with the years, yet it still carries the imprint of that summer in 1927 when a girl vanished into the mountains, leaving behind grief, wonder, and a mystery that continues to ripple across generations. Mary Lee's story, preserved in newspapers, oral histories, and local legend, is both a caution and a marvel. It is a reminder that the world holds mysteries beyond understanding, that mountains and forests can protect secrets as fiercely as they shelter life. It is a testament to the endurance of memory, the strength of family, and the haunting beauty of the unknown. Visitors, historians, and locals alike feel a chill in the air when her name is spoken, a mixture of awe, fear, and reverence. And though no one knows what truly happened to Mary Lee that summer, everyone in the valley knows that she lives on, in the rustling leaves, the humming wind, and the enduring soul of Appalachia. Even now, when the sun sets behind the ridges and the shadows stretch across the hollows, people sometimes see a flash of chestnut hair in the trees, a fleeting smile, a figure that disappears just as quickly as it appears. They whisper her name softly, and in that moment, the past and the present intertwine. Mary Lee, the girl who vanished so mysteriously, has become more than a memory. She is the living pulse of the mountains themselves, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, but to be felt, remembered, and carried forward through time. Her story leaves a mark, a quiet, haunting imprint on anyone who learns it. It is a tale of love and loss, of curiosity and courage, of the strange and wonderful power of the world around us. The vanishing of Mary Lee is more than a disappearance. It is an emblem of America's hidden histories, of the countless untold stories buried in the hills, waiting for someone to hear them, to remember them, and to be forever changed by them. And so, the legend endures, whispered through the hollows, carried on the winds, and etched into the hearts of all who dare to walk the mountains where Mary Lee once roamed.